And now, personally, I'm really looking forward to this talk because I've not interacted a lot with the art, and especially looking forward how an empty space can be like a nice to look at and play inside. So please welcome Martin. Was it right?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's a topic that we discussed. Actually, there you go. It's a topic we discussed quite recently with a bunch of colleagues. Like, just generally speaking, populating spaces, like how do you deal with all those empty spaces that come to you, right? And we thought that it would be interesting to kind of talk about it and like discuss about it with other people as well. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are like environment artists or artists in general, or at least have an interest in art? You don't have to be, yeah. Okay, cool. Right. So, all right, let's get started. So, let's turn those blockouts into something a bit more pretty. So, empty spaces. I'll be staying there also because I have to check the timer. Last time I was a bit too late. So, empty spaces. So, basically, as an environment artist in games, mostly, you'll have to deal with that quite a lot and quite all the time. Basically, level designers will do things. They will do spaces that fit for gameplay. That'll be interesting and that where cool things happen. And then they send those blockouts to you, and then you have to sort of fix them, try to make sense out of it, and make them look a bit prettier. The spaces that you'll have to deal with, or that you usually deal with, are unfortunately make very little sense. It's a bunch of rooms with a bunch of corridors in between, and things that you have to figure out how you can eventually make sense out of it in an ever-shifting mess, because obviously a layout is sort of temporary. In a perfect world, it's locked, it's fine, the gameplay works, everything's fine, everything's good, and you can start working on it, but that is rarely the case. As we might know if you guys work in games, things change quite often, and a corridor might not be a corridor at some point, right? Or you end up with, I don't know, 12 kilometers of corridors. Well, there is so many pipes I can put in there. So this is basically not really an art. Well, it's an art talk, but it's like more like a methodology of like how I do approach this process. It works for me, might not work for you, might not work for your project, but it's general enough so that you know the basics are there. So this is the kind of beautiful spaces that we have to deal with. It's beautiful, it's empty, it has nothing in it. It's basically, you bought an apartment that's like 600 square meters and you just packed and you open the door, your boxes are over there, and that's what you have. That's great. So what is this? I don't know. How do I bring this to final quality? We have to sort of look around, what can we do with this? Bring them to a good visual quality level, and ideally, in a perfect world, all those spaces would receive the same amount of attention, same amount of love, so that they look all equally good if possible. Another example, also the thing that we have to deal with is that we do have to respect quite a lot of constraints that are completely out of our control, such as sizes. If you work on a game, like you mentioned, Spider-Man, and you can run like super fast, then obviously you need bigger spaces. If you're working on a game like Resident Evil, you walk super slow, so the spaces are not going to get super big. It depends a lot on your game. And as an environment artist, you have zero control over that, right? So before that, I was working on Control like a while ago, and the game design constraints were just ridiculous. It was like, hey, here's a room. We need to have like 16 enemies in there. Ceiling is going to be 30-meter high. I think, if I remember correctly, the minimum size for a combat room was about 20 by 20 meters. Great. All right. And of course, you have to take care about production time and performances. So you do have those spaces. You do have to figure out how to make a little sense out of those spaces. Try to figure out how they work within a certain area, how they work in relation with each other as well, and try to make sense out of it. So how how can we get there? So usually a good thing to do is before you even start working, it's quite good practice to answer some questions first. Like the more you know about those spaces, the better you can estimate how much work there's going to be and how long it's going to take, of course. So I like to start with those four basic questions. What is this space? So that involves the purpose of that space, how it's built, by whom, when, etc., etc. What is the gameplay there? What do we do as a player there? Is there any specific player experience that should happen in this space? What kind of mood, etc. What is the point of that space? Is that, I don't know, a combat space, a space where there is like some story beats? Maybe there's a cinematic when you open the door. Maybe that space is just transition. Maybe you have a puzzle. Maybe it's just navigation. How much can I alter that space? Very important, because the game design or the level design or the guy is making the layout anyway will give it to you, and you're like, okay, cool, it doesn't make any sense. Like, how much can I change it, right? It might be that in some cases you can't change it. It's like, yeah, whatever you have there is whatever you're gonna have. Well, maybe I can negotiate. Maybe I can be like, oh, what if I put this wall, 50 centimeter this way? Like, does that influence the gameplay in a bad way? How flexible is the design? Is the gameplay locked? Sorry, blah, blah, blah. And this is very important, actually. Is it ever locked? No. And of course, what's my budget? So by budget, I mean, how many spaces we're talking about? How many of those spaces do I have to do? I can't really do that super well. I have to keep like a straight sort of. Yeah. How modular or unique do I have to go? And when is the deadline? How much time do I have? Because ultimately, you can't cheat that. That's like cheating death, right? It happens. All right, so first question, some elements that we should be considering. What is that space? So a blockout that you get is a very generic and very simple space. And usually the good thing to do at first is to try to reflect about the purpose of that space, because that will change a lot how you approach creating it. Say a basic square room with two entrances, that's 20 by 20 meters, for example, can be altered quite a lot depending on the function. I don't know, is that a storage room? Is that an office? Is that, I don't know, a control room? Is that a cave, a basement, a parking lot, whatever? Having an understanding of the function allows you also to tweak the space much more efficiently, because obviously a space is designed for a specific function, right? So you can tweak those spaces, and you can also start planning how they will connect with each other, because you know the function. And of course, depending on the theme and the purpose of the gameplay there, then maybe you can repurpose some spaces, maybe you can condense them, maybe you can break them into subspaces, etc. And of course, already super early on, giving a purpose to a space allows that space to be a bit more believable. It's not just another room, another corridor. Your generic spaceship interior sort of thing. Okay, what's the gameplay there? The way you design a space usually depends quite a lot on the purpose of that space. You always need to put yourself in the shoes of the player, because when you design a space, you're looking at it from the top down, or you're looking at it with the designer's eye, but ultimately you play a game. You're not making a movie, you're not making a book about architecture or anything. How is the player supposed to feel entering that space? How is it supposed to feel going through that space? What am I supposed to do as a player in that space? There's a lot of parameters that you can play with to alter that space based on the player experience. If I'm supposed to feel, I don't know, say it's a secret passage, you can make it super narrow, maybe like a super low ceiling, or maybe you need a vista, then you can make it super high, maybe you can have gigantic windows. Technically, the space is the same as a corridor, but I just opened gigantic windows so that I can see outside, and I feel not like in a clunky environment that's super narrow. If you want the player to feel oppressed or maybe exhilarated or whatever. Yeah, is it straightforward, or does the player need to go around a bit more? Like, what is it like? Usually, you want to see the exit or the goal or where the player is supposed to go, but sometimes you want the player to feel lost as well. You want the player to explore the space a little bit. Good example would be, like the basement, the infamous basement level in Last of Us, where you can't see shit, and it's just water, dark, you can't see anything, you don't know what to do, because the goal of that specific part is to actually make the player feel lost and stressed. Obviously, this part here requires a lot of coordination with other departments, game design, level design, UX, etc. What is it that we try to highlight in this part of the level? What is it? How is it in terms of the story? How is it at this point of the story? How do we want the player to feel? What kind of emotions? What kind of tension we want to have? Stuff like that. And all that you can contribute by environment, and you should. So how much can I alter that space? So yeah, you get your blockout. It doesn't look like anything. It's a box, like a shell, basically. And sometimes you will be making those, depends on your company, your projects, and like who does what. Sometimes you will be also making the layout, so there is no problem, but sometimes it's made by some other people that have different expectations. Maybe they don't care about art. Maybe they think you're just an artist and you're annoying. You'll get a lot of those layouts that make absolutely no sense, like absolutely no sense. Like you could just go on Google, type, D&D dungeon, whatever. Like you'll get those little squares with those 90-degree corridors. Like the dungeon doesn't work like that, right? It's like there's a ton of empty space between the rooms. It's like, what? Like the people that build that space just like throw rocks in there? What? Like it doesn't make any sense. Like people, like when people build spaces, they build it for making an experience or putting an accent on several gameplay features. They don't really, sometimes they don't even care about how it feels or how it's built, stuff like that. That's your role. So looking at those spaces, if you can tweak them a little bit, you can propose alterations. Like maybe I'll try to keep what you want to say with that space, but I'll just negotiate with you so I can modify it so that I'm happy, you're happy, everybody's happy. That could be cutting spaces. Oh, maybe we don't need that corridor that's like going all around. Maybe we can just merge that into a room. Maybe the room has a corridor in it. Maybe it has those glass walls. Maybe it doesn't need to be like you go through a doorway into a maintenance shaft to go around. This usually takes the form of a negotiation between you and the level designers, sometimes the game designers as well. For example, again, with the beautiful metrics for control, we were building this sort of turning bridge, like a huge turntable bridge, right? And it had catwalks, like, those tiny little maintenance catwalks. Like in real life, they're literally like 60 centimeters wide. It's those things, it's not really made for having a tour, it's made for maintenance, right? And the game designers go like, okay, well, they're a bit too narrow, they're super cool, but they're too narrow. We need 4 AIs to be able to stand next to each other at any time on those stairs. I had to make the stairs 6 meters wide. For a catwalk, it's not so great because obviously it changes the look completely of what you're building. Anyway, I think, I need to hurry a little bit. So usually when you do this sort of negotiation thing, it's really important, really, really important that it takes the form of a negotiation and that you know what you're talking about. You need to show that you understand the layout, you understand the intentions, you understand the design, so that when you make those suggestions, the other party don't take that as a artist request. Oh, it would be so pretty if we did this. Them artists, like those guys, right? Like you want to be showing that you care about the gameplay as well, and that you can do suggestions to maybe make it better. Not even maybe making better, but just like, can we be both happy, right? Anyway, it's a good rule for negotiations that you show that you understand the other person, what they want to get out of the deal, right? What's my budget? So Another super important thing is to understand your constraints. Because when you understand your constraints, you have a frame that you can work within, and basically you can make the constraints work in your favor. It's super stressful to have 100% freedom. I always prefer when there is a form or another of constraints, because it means that there are things on your way that you can't change, and you have to jungle with those, go around, try to find solutions, because no constraint is super stressful. You don't know where to go. Yeah, okay. Maybe there is a lot of space to cover, and maybe you don't have much time. That can be one of the constraints. So how do you solve that? Well, you have to be clever about it. Maybe you can arrange those spaces better. Maybe you can merge them. Maybe you can cut some parts that are a bit redundant. Maybe you can reuse a lot of things. You just have to sort of wrap your head about how you think about it. It's very, very, of course, context dependent. Depends on your project, your team, your company, whatever. You also need to be super reactive, and when you will have a lot of different issues coming your way, and there is no other option than solving those and going around the problems. Like, a problem is only a problem. Well, the definition of a problem also involves that there is a solution, right? So that's something beautiful about a problem, because the concept of problem is tied to the concept of a solution. You can't have a problem without a solution. It's just that you don't know the solution yet, right? And of course, a deadline is a deadline. Deadline has dead in it for a reason. It always happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we do work in an industry where trust is super important. Like, I need to be able to trust you that you will deliver this in this amount of time. Or I tell my boss or my producer or my manager, like, yeah, I can do that in 20 days. Well, it has to be done in 20 days, right? It's not like I can, because then what? Then I lose my trust, right? They're going to be like, next time, hey, can you do this in 10 days? Well, yeah, sure. I'll be like, you sure? Right? So no matter how you plan, always alter your plans. Make a plan B, make a plan C, so that you can react and hit your deadline. And of course, you need to communicate any potential issues, delays, whatever, to manage the expectations. All right, so now we're in sort of gathering information mode. So let's take a look at like 3 concepts that are super helpful to move forward efficiently. First concept is the mental library. So a mental library is something that you should always be working on as an artist. When you walk down the street, don't look at your phone, look at what's around you, because that's much more useful. Always be on the lookout when you're somewhere, right? Try to figure out how the spaces are arranged. Why is that here? How is that thing built? Why it's there? How does it work? And the goal with that is trying to absorb as many information as possible. And of course, you were not born in the Middle Ages, but you can read books about the Middle Ages, you can read history books, you can watch movies, you can watch series, whatever. It doesn't matter what you absorb, you just need to absorb everything as much as you can. And then, by just doing that sort of regularly, all the time, then it becomes like a passive sort of thing that you do all the time. And then you can rely on your memory to create spaces, to know if a space feels good, feels bad, feels wrong, feels right. Of course, somebody mentioned in the office last time we did this talk that he likes to take pictures better. I don't like this approach, although it's valid. The thing is that relying on your memory, you will lose a lot of information on the way, but the goal is just process, right? You will get those references out of internet eventually. I think it's much more interesting for you as a person to just get your brain to access those informations faster, not spend ages looking on the internet. Example, you're parking your car in a parking lot, right? So you should be looking at the pillars because you don't want to crush your car, but maybe you should be looking up. There is a shitload of stuff happening over there. There's all sorts of pipes. What are those pipes? Why is this one red? Why is this one just silver? What is this? Lights, I can see probably some liquids. I can see probably some gas. I can see some water. I can see cables, cable trays over there. There is all sorts of stuff going on. Here, same. Where is that? Like, anyone has any idea where is that? Doesn't need to be a specific building, but just, yes, you're on top of the roof. Probably a dome. Probably like some church. And that's the structure of the roof there. But this is super cool because if you build a space now, you could just say that you're walking on those catwalks, and now suddenly your level designer is like, oh, there is a corridor, it's boring. But this is a corridor. It just looks more interesting because there is shit going on around it. There is a roof, like maybe now you're, I don't know, you just climb on top of that church, whatever, or there is a part of the level on the rooftop, but you need to get there. This is much more interesting than a corridor. Although in terms of gameplay, it is a corridor, right? Those trees, okay, those are spruce, right? Someone can tell me the difference between this one and those ones. Why? Yeah, so why are they different? Yes. This one is alone, right? So he has maximum exposition to sunlight, so he's growing equally in all directions. Those guys grow up in a very tight sort of space. So basically, as much as they grow, the branches just die because the sunlight doesn't reach underneath here. This is something you just go walk on the woods. Oh shit. Okay. Supermarket, you go to do your grocery, right? But maybe instead of buying candies, you could be looking at this. Vent systems, fire sprinklers. Why is there a bump here on the roof? It's probably because there is the AC system over there. This could be also, you're walking around and you look at the types of vegetation that makes you a better artist. If you have to work, say, on an open world game, you know which type of vegetation goes where. Why does it grow there? Why doesn't it grow there? Why this species here? Why this species here? Knowledge and vocabulary. So before going into looking into references, there is something that you should always do before that. It's taking a look and trying to understand the space that you're building first. I like to use the example of HVAC systems. If you do your homework, not perfectly, but if you do your homework, then you will understand how the space works, what is the vocabulary, and basically those informations will make you so much faster at looking for reference pictures, because now I know that this is called a reducer. So instead of Googling, what the thing that goes small after, reducer. Just a random example. A crimped joint. I don't know what a crimped joint is, right? But I'm making a modular kit right now. Boom, now I know what a crimped joint is. I can look for a reference much better. Like now, if you look at this, for instance, like those are the spots where the hot air is, being dragged out of the room. So now when you're building your pipe system, then you know that those needs to be evenly distributed. So that's how you evacuate the maximum of hot air out of the room. So when you build your stuff like that, at least you know how it works, which means that you can extrapolate and you can stylize, you can adapt, right? This is just random example of things, but unfortunately I need to hurry. Another thing, now you have started looking at reference pictures, okay? Let's pretend we're doing a hospital corridor, okay? So I Google, hospital corridor. I have all those pictures there. The thing now that I need to do to be efficient is try to find a common denominator. Okay, what is it that I see on all those pictures? What is it that you guys see on every single picture? Lights, yes. Sorry? Same colors, yeah. Blue is a common color in hospitals. Right? You're not going to put red everywhere, right? What else? Doors, yes. Sorry? Yes, very good. Yes, this is a personal favorite of mine. This is super cool because this tells you a lot about the space as well, because you might have people in wheeling chairs or people that can't walk properly, right? Yeah, what else? Yeah, because it needs to be easy to clean as well. That's why you have linoleum on the floor, right? So you need to pay a lot of attention to all those, because an element is on all those pictures. you should probably have it. Right? If you find like 10 references and only one has, I don't know, an arrow, then maybe you don't need the arrow. Okay, so now the next concept, working layers. So all the tools, when I say tools, I mention like methods, right? Should be generic enough so that they can apply to mostly any situation. Because you might be working on a medieval game, sci-fi game, anything, right? And maybe I've personally never worked set in the Middle Ages. But if my tools are generic enough, it doesn't matter. It could be Rome, it could be World War II, it could be anything. So some steps, like a key concept of that is that it works pretty much like sculpting or painting. What you want to do is broad strokes on every area without focusing too much on anything that's too specific. You can always stop at any point, step back a little bit and take a look at what you've done already. And another key element about working layers is that every single area will look the same. Like, you know, we always say, like, you know, when you start painting or sculpting, it's easy to start going like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, do the shading on the eye. Looks fucking nice. There you go. But then you realize that the construction of your face is broken. It doesn't matter how good the shading is. If the construction is bad, it's going to look bad, right? So several steps on how to approach that. First thing you should do, use architecture. Second thing, modular kits, surfacing, propping, decals, and scatter. Use architecture. Why is it that we start with the architecture always first? It's because you have those huge empty spaces, right? What you can do is already at that point split it and create subspaces. For instance, you can raise floors, lower ceilings, create visual lines, add blockers, pillars, little walls, anything to make the space feel a bit smaller. Imagine like this room here, just the fact that you add a pillar here makes the space already feel a little smaller. Pillars, super good way of splitting spaces. This is cheap, this is quick, and overall super, super cost efficient. I like cost efficiency, both in life and in work. You're not adding any new content. You're not adding any new meshes, new props, new textures, new nothing. You're just adding a bunch of vertices. And all those elements you should already have, because you built that room, so adding a pillar is not a big deal, right? This pillar has what? It has this sort of wood thingy that's already used there. It has this sort of plastic, super glossy plastic thing that's probably the same as this one here. You're not adding anything. It's cheap. It's good. Those are like some quick examples of how you can split spaces. Imagine those spaces without the things highlighted in green. Like they would be just horribly, horribly impossible to prop. Just adding a bunch of pillars, a bunch of structures, stuff like that. You make the space feel smaller and it's easier to dress it. This is like some other example of how you can use architecture to split stuff. Second thing that you do afterwards is using modular kits. Modular kits are super cost efficient as well. They are a super efficient way of quickly adding masses to your spaces. And they can be so generic that you have them everywhere. You know, we're talking about AC units. I think every time I started working on a new game, I made HVAC units, kits of vents, or cables, lights. This is the kind of stuff you do every time. They're quick to build. They can be a little tricky to elaborate because you need to take care about a lot of things like pivots, how you rotate them, can you scale them, how do you split them, what's the metric, the grid, the base, like all sorts of things. But the only way to get good at it is just to practice. Each kit also needs its own logic, its purpose, and its scope. If you're building a game in, say, like modern times, whatever, and there is a lot of parking spaces, whatever, then you're probably going to need those pipes, cables, HVAC units, trash bins, stuff like that, shelves maybe. There is like a bunch of kits that you'll always have. And those, of course, can be butchered, kit bashed, whatever. Once they're built, you just build some more out of it. super reusable. Good. Kits. See, like basic stuff. Pipes, drains, sofas, so you can build all sorts of sofas. Classic pipes, electrical things, walls, I don't know, lockers, water towers. Those are kits. Those are cheap, good, efficient. Surfacing, blends, basically. You will have a lot of those empty surfaces. You can't just populate everything, and that would be a bit silly as well, because you do need some spaces that are areas of rest. Blends are super efficient for that. Basically, you get details into your large, boring surfaces. And good blends are fairly cheap to do. It's same materials with variations. Good stuff. Couple example of blends. This one, for example, super easy to make. It's a brick, you have graffitis, you just make a tileable texture of graffiti, you blend that, boom, done, couple decals, and that's it. Propping. Okay, so now we're talking about populating spaces with props, right? But the propping, see how propping is like way down the list, because props are expensive. Somebody needs to model them, somebody needs to make hyperlays, somebody needs to texture them, bake details, whatever. You should always start with the largest ones. Why? Because they occupy more space. So value for the buck, right? Like this would be a good example. If you make a conference room, maybe this kind of stuff. Because if you make that, you can have 3, 4, boom, space already looks a bit better. I don't know, some speakers, tables, big stuff. And then once you've done a pass with that, you start doing a bit smaller things. Going down in granularity. Try to plan them in advance as well, because they can be costly to build. Of course, okay, this is an example. So we do have an empty shell. It's a building. Here it already has the blends and stuff, because unfortunately I didn't have earlier screenshots. So say this is an office where people started packing, then left in a hurry. That's my space, boring. I already have added this sort of volume here to try to split it a little bit so that it's easier. Boom, now I'm replacing the gameplay elements, covers, with tables, and I have those shelves there as well. Only the big stuff first, right? So see, like it's one table, you can make 2, 3, 10 variations out of it. Same for the shelves. Just put your gameplay elements. Those, I didn't decide to place them here. They were boxes, like the boxes you had. Level design placed those, right? Boom, now I'm adding a bunch of stuff on top. Going down in granularity, okay? Some of those can obstruct line of sight, which is not good because level design is not going to be happy. But you could just make them dynamic or breakable, whatever. Starting with generic stuff. And then I can dress a little bit by adding those tiny little visual elements that have absolutely no incidence on gameplay. Purely visuals. And then it's like where I can add the decals and stuff. Decals and scatter. So that's the last thing that usually you do. Decals and scatter are used to blend everything together. Decals can act as blends, but they're much more expensive because they're a unique texture, right? So you want to plan them and use them scarcely. Scatter is a super efficient way to populate spaces as well, because you can reuse stuff you already have, stuff that are generic. You can use all sorts of ways to scatter things. And if your engine, whatever, supports instancing, then it's fairly cheap. It adds a lot of geo for free. Like here, you know, little bottles, bunch of trash stuff, and decals. Oh, yeah. There you go. Those are like example of adding stuff that you scatter, you know, bunch of trash, papers, markings on the roads, graffiti, all those good things. Couple of like mural paintings. Those are super cheap to make because, well, it's not like you can have this one like 6 times in the level though, but like graffitis are super cool because you can just sort of reuse them in different contexts. So more examples. This is a base interior. 10 minutes. Oh, we have time actually. I kind of went a little bit too fast, maybe. More examples. This is a base interior. The theme is an urban area that's been occupied by squatters, junkies, whatever. Okay. So this is obviously not the blockout. As I said before, I don't have the screenshots, but this is sort of fairly empty right now. What do I do with this? Boom, replace the game design covers by elements, adding a bunch of granularity, big stuff, a bit smaller stuff, a little chimney over there, couple of ad hoc beds for partying, and then you start adding the dressing stuff. Boom, and then blends and decals. That's cheap. Only very, very simple stuff. Boom, 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 boom. Next. Also, the good thing about working like that, as I mentioned, working in layers, is that if I have 10 rooms like that, and all of them share the same theme, then I can reuse stuff, right? Like, of course, maybe not the painting on the wall, because then that would be a bit silly. But the chairs, I don't know, the trash, the carpets, whatever. Oh, I have clicked the TV thing. I broke the thing. I broke it. Help me, help me. You don't. Oh, shit. Oh no. Yes, I know. One button. Why does it have all those buttons though? Yeah. Like I can do it. So, thank you. Why does it have all those buttons? Okay, another example. So this is like a water treatment processing area, like an industrial whatever area. Interior control room. I don't decide those. Well, I have the space. I know sort of what I'm doing, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a control room. Okay. So how do I make this a control room? So remember architecture first. Boom, I break the space. Because this space is silly. I break it. Technically on paper, it's still the same, right? So I'm not too much in trouble. Yes, Milos will argue, and I agree with him, that now I can't shoot through there, right? Yes, it was unbreakable. Let's pretend it's breakable, okay? Like it's breakable glass, okay? So this is obviously the same as that, if it's breakable. Yes, it's breakable. Trust me. Okay. Now, what I've done here is I've split the space. I've added a little bit of height there, so that it feels like the space is not just this boring square room flat. You mentioned, I think, the importance of height variation also. Boom. Now I do my thing. I replace the stuff from level design, the covers and whatnot. So those are boxes, right? But here I made a kit of like machine things. They're just machine things. I just kit bash this, reuse the buttons everywhere. Cheap. And then I can dress it up with my kits. Like those things, super cheap to make, super cool. I think everybody does that, like in any game. It's like pipes. And it's over. How long do I have? 2 minutes? Now that's good. See? Now? So now let's talk about Redhill Games. Like it's my corporate moment, like Rob, right? So we're in Helsinki and we're looking for more people. We have recently transitioned to a new project that we can't really talk about at the moment, unfortunately. It's if you've been working in games for a bit, you know that it always happens, right? We're looking for a bunch of people. We have a booth, so we're there. We'll be around. So come talk to us if you want to know anything or if you want to apply or whatever. And the guys made also a beautiful video so that you don't have to ask questions to me after watching this. And there you go. What are we working on? Well, I'm not going to have to answer because they did.
I cannot say.
The first time I played that particular game was with a group of friends.
It's very similar to other games. You have to open a program and then you will launch the game.
Started playing with some random people.
That's a game that pew pew and boom boom.
I lose badly.
And we won.
But eventually I had a lot of fun.
Now it's AAA. Now we're talking.
It's AAA, first-person shooter.
Sense of accomplishment.
Deliver our absolute best efforts.
We really put the bar high up.
This is one of the one-in-a-lifetime chance.
You will know more when you join us.
Don't wait. Apply like right now.
Ta-da! So don't ask me what I'm working on, okay? All right. Questions? Maybe.
Martin, thank you very much.
Am I on time or? Yeah.
It's amazing. Everything
cool.
is great. So now we have time for either jokes or questions. So
Or both.
like, you know, as you wish, Joke or question?
Well, I've
They're
never
giving
seen
me
you
a
before.
mic. Yeah, no problem. When you're populating a space and, for an example, if you're taking an exterior and you have to populate that space and you want to put a vehicle there, for an example, does it, you have any issues where you like have to work out how that vehicle got there? Is there a narrative surrounding the decisions that you make with your prop placement or things like that? Or do you just go like, yeah, that'll do, that fills the space nicely, and then realize that there's no roads into that area and the only way that could have been put there is with a helicopter?
Yes. It depends on your game, actually. Like, some games do care very little. Some games care a lot more about the narrative and stuff like that. So from my previous experiences, I worked mostly on games that are serious about that kind of stuff. So yeah, if there is a vehicle, I will try to figure out how it got there, because that would just... I couldn't sleep. I would just look at that shit and be like, no. So yeah, trying to figure out how stuff end up where is important, I think, because it's part of making something believable. Like, a lot of people, like everybody, they will go through that space. They will, maybe at first they will not notice the car, but eventually they'll be like, whoa. That car, like, somebody dropped it from a helicopter or something. It's just all those things that people don't know, but they will notice unconsciously all the time. So that's why I mentioned also that you should be documenting about what you put and where and how. Because you've been in parking lots. Who has never been in a parking lot? Underground parking lot. Okay, there you go. So everyone has been at least once in an underground parking lot. You know how a parking lot looks like. Chances are you've been several times. Everybody knows how it looks or how it's supposed to look. They may not know that the fire sprinklers work how they do work, but they will notice that they're missing. So yeah, it is important, yes. Questions? Yes.
Thank you. Well, not really a question, more like words of appreciation, because really what you were saying, I really feel it. So yeah, thank you. And another thing that I really mentioned, I really love how you call this battle between environment art and level design negotiations. So thank you for that, because honestly, it's more like a battle than negotiation.
Yeah,
So yeah, thank you.
I was a level designer before, so I'm kind of battling with myself. So that's fine, yeah. But yeah, the struggle is real. I mean, both of those persons have different jobs and they have different objectives, but ultimately the goal should be to make a cool space, right? I mean, you don't want to make a shitty game. So everybody is obviously trying to, get satisfaction of what they do. The thing is that I think the most important is to just show that you understand what the other person is trying to do and that you're trying to help. But yeah, I mean, we're not supposed to say battle. We're supposed to say cooperation. Yes, we're cooperating. Do you guys have more questions? Yes.
Hi, and I have a question. It's just example. In horror games, like we have a room which are scalable, and what do you think? How it should be populated? Is it another way of population space, or how do you can imagine it?
You mean for a horror game, like how you would approach that? But
For example, locked room.
like
Which
you can't get out.
Yes, and it became scalable, bigger, for example. And do you need to change some uh, population this space?
You mean I'm inside a room, I can't get out, and the change of that room, the size of that room changes dynamically while I'm playing, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a bit tricky. It scales up, right? That's very specific. You mean like in layers of fear or something like that, right? Yeah. It depends. It depends. It's at this point it becomes not really my problem because it's very technical, so it becomes the problem of somebody else.
Okay.
Right? Not my problem.
Thank you.
I
Very-
can be
very
there.
good.
I can be there to help, right? But not my problem.
Very good answer. I love that.
No. If you have questions, yeah, I can help, but I'm not going to be doing this.
Just one sort of broad scope here. So when you're dealing with environment art and you're populating spaces and things like that, what kind of an impact does destructible environments have to that? When you have, obviously there's things that are going to stay there from the level design team, but when you populate a space, do you think, oh, is that, like the windows you was explaining, do they have collision? Are they breakable? What have you? Put aside the technical implications of destruction systems and things like that, which is a different beast. Does that change the way that you would populate a space, or how you would clutter something? And when does that change the process that you've just discussed, or is there any difference there?
Yes, it does change it quite a lot. Let's pretend. That we're looking at that thing here, right? So what is dynamic, what is not dynamic? Okay, so the level design tells me to put those things here, right? Those are covers. So I'm a player, I'm being shot at, I do this, I survive, okay? Those I won't be able to move. They can't be destructible because the level design, the game design tells me it's a hard cover, right? Now those do block line of sight a little bit, right? Like if I'm standing there, I'm crouching here, somebody's shooting me from over there, obviously now this stuff is here, and now it's blocking line of sight. So technically I have changed the intention here. But if those are dynamic or breakable, then it doesn't affect anything, right? I shoot or I get shot at, those break, we're back to this technically, right? But obviously those block line of sight, so it's a negotiation. This is not, it's borderline, I shouldn't really be doing that, right? This, adding carpets on the floor, little cabling, little vents and stuff, no big deal. This is a bit dodgy, right? Also, it depends on your game. If it puts an accent on breaking things, dynamic things, whatever. Usually they're not considered as props. They're destructible. They're there, but they're not really there because they can be broken. But it does affect how you make things, like this glass that's supposed to be breakable, right? Yeah, it is breakable. This is not the same as that, right? Because if the glass, well, the glass is breakable, of course. So this is basically there until I shoot it, right? So it's kind of not there. Because if there's a guy here, I'm starting to shoot it full auto, the guy is gonna fucking die, right? So they're not technically walls. Now, this could be debated because now the frame might not be breakable. And that means that a few bullets will hit that on the way, which means that, say, this is not here, there's a guy here, I shoot 20 times, I'm gonna hit, say, 15 times, right? Maybe here, 3 or 4 get lost on the frame. So technically, again, I'm not being, but
More questions? So then I will use the chance. So you were speaking about, in my opinion, like about the closed space, something like a limited.
Yep.
How is the process different for like an open world or something which is like vastly, like, I don't know, 10 times bigger? Or are you using automation tools? So how is
yes,
it
you
different?
you do that, yes. But it also depends quite a bit on what kind of space you're building, right? If you're building a forest or if you're building, I don't know, a parking lot, it's going to be super different. So I would say that the principle is exactly the same because I am using tools that are super generic. I'm using concepts, right? I'm using concepts. So if I'm doing a forest, the architecture, well, the trees are going to be my architecture, right? The modular kits, I can make, well, I can't really make modular trees. Well, I can, right? But I'm not going to be using them the same way. I'll just use the concept of sort of propping, same sort of way. Like I'm going to start with the big volumes, the big masses, and then I'm going to go down, 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 down. So you're making, say, okay, give me an example, like what you want to do, like
The first is a
Forest.
great example because,
Okay.
like in nature, in reality, every tree is different. So
Yes.
it's not possible like you make one tree and you copy it like 100 million times and it looks amazing. So
that can be debated. You could do
okay.
yeah, because you could literally, well, that would be costly and time consuming to do, but you can build a system that does that on runtime, right? Usually what will happen is if you do an open world, or at least like a natural environment that needs a forest, you'll first figure out what kind of biome you want. Here we want spruce, okay? So what are you going to do? You're going to do, those are costly to make, they're time consuming to make, and if you need to make them super nice and stuff like that. So it depends of the scope. It always depends on the scope. Say you're making a survival game in the woods. There's going to be only one environment and it's going to be a forest. Maybe you can have cabins and stuff, but most of the time in the game you'll spend in a forest. So you know that you're going to need to put effort in the trees, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to basically start looking at how spruces grow, and you're going to be like, okay, so I'm going to need a bunch of those, right? Because maybe the edge of a forest, this is because on the picture the wood been cut, so basically that's why you see that, because in real life, if it was just the end of the wood, you'll have those, right? Or at least those which have on this side they're like that, and then their branches grow like that, right? So you'll go like, okay, well, I'm probably gonna need a bunch of those and a bunch of those, and then you go like, okay, ideally how many can I make? Well, you have, how much time do I have? You have, I don't know, this much time. Then I'm gonna be like, well, what I'm gonna do is probably I'm gonna look into making small ones, medium-sized one, and large ones. Which obviously for a tree means young, old, right? So if they're old, they're gonna be a bit more dead. That didn't go well. Okay, they're gonna be less grain, right, on this part, right, and they're gonna prevent the other trees around them from growing so much, right? So I'm gonna make types of trees, and I'm gonna make variation of those, because if I make this tree here, then it's easy to make 6 more, especially if you use something like Speed Tree or Houdini or whatever. Like, it's just easy to make variations. Like the heavy lifting is to make the first one. And then you can approach it like, okay, well, in a forest, what's in a forest? There is the main species, there is undergrowth, like the little trees that sort of are not the same species, but that are growing, because maybe one of those died and it fell, right? Now there is sun reaching the ground, so those little ones will go like, oh, and they will grow, right? There might be other species. So you have the shrubs as well. So you need to figure out what kind of species you're gonna have, how many variations you can make, stuff like that. But the principles are basically exactly the same. It's the same.
Thank
You're
you very
going to
much.
need rocks, grass. You're going to use blends for the ground. Maybe it's grass mixed with needles, rocks. I don't know. It works the same, basically.
Okay, thank you very much.
That was long.
It's all right. Martin, thank you very much for the presentation. It has been really insightful. And we'll follow with the next lecture about the experience of developing a game for mixed reality devices, like a VR with mixed reality. So yeah, feel free to stay.
Thank you.